we as humans like to always compare things. We compare apples to oranges. We compare who is a better footballer, Messi or Ronaldo. We compare Mercedes to Ferrari and whatnot. In today's IT world, the trending comparison is Kubernetes versus Docker, which is in fact an apples to oranges type of a comparison. And what you should rather compare is Kubernetes versus Docker Swarm, because these two compete on a level playing field. On that note, let me get started today. My name is Vardhan, and I'll be representing Edureka in this video. And as you can see, these will be the parameters I'll be comparing these two tools against: installation and cluster configuration, GUI, scalability, auto scaling, load balancing, updates and rollbacks, data volumes, and finally, logging and monitoring. Okay. Now, before I get started with the difference, let me just go back a little bit and give you a brief about Kubernetes and Docker Swarm. Okay. Now, first of all, Kubernetes and Docker Swarm are both container orchestration tools. Orchestration is basically needed when you have multiple containers in production and you will have to manage each of these containers. And that's why you need these tools. Okay. Kubernetes was first of all created by Google. Okay. And then they donated the whole project to the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. And yeah, now it's a part of the CNCF open source project. Okay. And since Kubernetes was Google's brainchild, it has a huge developer community and a lot of people who are contributing to Kubernetes. So if you have any errors at any point of time when you're working with Kubernetes, then you can straight away put that error on github.com or Stack Overflow, and you'll definitely have solutions to those errors. So that's the thing about Kubernetes. And we consider Kubernetes to be more preferable for a complex architecture, because that's when the whole power of Kubernetes comes out. So Kubernetes is really strong. Okay. If you're going to use a very simple architecture, maybe an application which has very few services and which needs very few containers, then you're not going to really see the power of Kubernetes. When you have like hundreds of thousands of containers in prod, that's when Kubernetes is actually beneficial. And that's where you see the difference between Kubernetes and Docker Swarm, right? So Docker Swarm, on the other hand, is not that good when you have to deal with hundreds of containers. Okay. So functionality wise, they are pretty much head to head with each other. Okay. So with both, you can set up your cluster. But yeah, Docker Swarm is a little easier and it's more preferable when you have less number of containers. Okay. But whatever it is, if you are dealing with prod environment, then Kubernetes is your solution, because Kubernetes will ensure your cluster strength in prod a little more, at least when you compare it to Docker Swarm. Okay. And yeah, the Docker Swarm community is unfortunately not as big as the Kubernetes, because Google is basically bigger than Docker, and Docker Swarm is again owned by and maintained by Docker Inc. So that is the deal with Kubernetes and Docker Swarm. All right. But never mind the fact that the base containers which are used for these are again Docker containers. So at the end of the day, Docker is definitely going to be a part of Kubernetes and as part of Docker Swarm. It's just what you do after your containers. That's what matters, the container management part. Okay. So anyway, I have given you a good brief about these two tools. Okay. Now let's get down to the functional differences between these two. Let's start with installation and cluster configuration. Now, for setting up your cluster with Kubernetes, it's going to be really challenging in the beginning, because you will have to set up multiple things. You'll have to first bring up your cluster, then you have to set up the storage volume for your cluster, and then you have to set up your environment, and then you have to bring up your dashboard. You have to bring up your pod network, and when you bring up your dashboard, you have to do the cluster role binding and all these things. Okay, and then finally you can get your node to join your cluster. Okay, but with Docker Swarm, it's pretty simple and straightforward. You need to run one command to bring up the cluster and one command at the node end for it to join the cluster, and two simple commands and your cluster is running. You can straight away get started with deploying. Okay, so this is where Kubernetes falls short. It's a little more complicated, but it's worth the effort, because the cluster strength that you get with Kubernetes is way more stronger than Docker Swarm. Okay, so when it comes to failover mechanisms and to recovery, in such places, Kubernetes is a little faster. And in fact, Kubernetes will give you more security compared to Docker Swarm, because your containers are more likely to fail with Swarm than with Kubernetes. So it's not like I'm saying that your containers will definitely fail, but if at all they fail, then there are more chances of your containers failing at Swarm than with Kubernetes. Okay, so that's about the cluster strength. And if you are really important about your prod environment, and if you have a business which is basically running over these containers, then I would say your preference should be Kubernetes, because at the end of the day, business and your containers running in prod are more important. So the cluster is more important, and that's why Kubernetes. Now moving on to the next parameter, we have GUI. Now Kubernetes wins over here also, because Kubernetes provides a dashboard over which we can basically control our cluster. Not just control, we can also figure out and get to know what is the status of your cluster and how many pods are running in your cluster, how many deployments are there, how many containers are running, how many services are running, and which are your nodes. You will have all these details in a very simple fashion. Okay, so it's not like you don't get all these things with Docker Swarm. Okay, you get it with Docker Swarm also, but you don't have a GUI over here. There's no dashboard where you can visually see everything. So you can use the CLI with Docker Swarm, and you can use the CLI with Kubernetes also. But it's just that Kubernetes provides you a dashboard, which is a little better. And to our eyes, it's a little more easier to understand when you see graphs, when you see your deployments would say your all your deployments are 100% healthy. When you see some things like that, you will relate to it a lot more and you will like it a lot more. So that's this additional functionality which you get with Kubernetes. Okay, so that's where Kubernetes wins over here. And I also want to add another point that with your Kubernetes dashboard, you can easily scale up your containers, and you can also control your deployments and make new deployments in a very simple fashion. So even non-technical people can use Kubernetes. Okay, but I mean, if you're a non-technical person, then what are you doing with containers, right? So that's what veterans would say. So seasoned developers would say that, I mean, if you're not technical enough to deal with containers, then you don't deserve to be here. So that is one point which can defend Docker Swarm, but it does not change the fact that Kubernetes makes our life easier. Now, moving on to the third one, which is scalability. Both Kubernetes and Docker Swarm are very good for scaling up. Okay, so that is the whole point of these tools. So when we say orchestration, this is the biggest benefit. Okay, Kubernetes can scale up very fast. Swarm can also scale up very fast, but there's a saying that Swarm is 5 times faster than Kubernetes when it comes to scaling up. That is the point. So I think Swarm just nudges Kubernetes over here to victory, right? But yeah, whatever it is, it's scaling up. That's what matters. Since both can do it, well and good. So the next point is auto scaling. Now, if I was a salesman, then I would use this whole point of auto scaling as my sales pitch, because auto scaling is all about intelligence, right? With Kubernetes, your Kubernetes will always be analyzing your server traffic, and whenever there's a sudden increase in your traffic, your Kubernetes will automatically scale up your number of containers. Okay, and then when the traffic reduces, then automatically your number of containers will also be scaled down. Okay, so there's no manual intervention whatsoever. I don't need to barge in. So if there's a weekend coming up, and if I'm pretty sure that my website is going to get a lot of traffic over the weekend, over the Saturday and Sunday, then I don't have to manually configure my deployments for the weekend. Kubernetes will automatically do that for me. And with Docker Swarm, that is a major drawback, because you cannot do auto scaling. You will have to do it manually. Okay, you can do scaling. It's not that scaling is a big deal, but during emergency situations, it's really important. Okay, Kubernetes will automatically analyze that, okay, you're getting a lot of traffic today, and it will automatically scale it up for you. Okay, but Swarm is a little different. And if there's an emergency, and if your containers are running out of the number of services which they can request, then they cannot do anything. I mean, worst case scenario, they will just die out. Okay, so this is where Kubernetes wins during these emergency situations, because auto scaling is not possible with Docker Swarm. Now, moving on to my next point, which is load balancing. Okay, now with Kubernetes, at times you will have to manually configure these load balancing options. Okay, with Docker Swarm, you don't need to do that because it's automatically done. Now, the reason you should do it with Kubernetes is because in Kubernetes, you will have multiple nodes, and inside each node, you will have multiple pods, right? And inside these pods, you will have many containers. Now, if your service is basically spanning over multiple containers running in different pods, then there's this concept of load balancing, which you have to manually configure, because pods can let all the containers inside them to talk to each other. Okay, but when it comes to managing your load between these pods, that's where the challenge comes, especially when these pods are on different nodes. Okay, so you will face times when you will have to manually configure these load balancing, and you will have small issues. Okay, but it's not that it's going to be major. You can still deal with it. But Swarm wins it because you have no concept of pods over here. You have a Swarm cluster in which there are containers. So these containers can be easily discovered by others. Okay, so they use IP addresses, and they can easily just discover each other, and you're all good. So that's the point. And now coming to the sixth point, which is rolling updates and rollbacks. Let's say that these two are very important aspects, and these are some of the best features of these two tools. Okay, now rolling updates is basically needed for any application. Now, be it a software application which is using Kubernetes or not, whether it's using Docker Swarm or not, any application needs updates. Okay, so rolling updates is really important because any application would need to have updates to it, right? Any software application, any web application, it definitely needs updates to its functionality. Okay, now if your application is basically containerized, then at any point of time, you don't need to bring down your containers and then make the updates. With the help of using these containers, the different containers and these pods can be progressively given the updates. Okay, so in Kubernetes, we have the concept of pods. And inside the pods, we have multiple containers, right? So in Kubernetes, what happens is these rolling updates are gradually sent to each of these pods as a whole. So all the containers inside the pods will be gradually given these rolling updates, okay? With Docker Swarm, you have the same thing, but it's a little different because you don't have pods. The rolling updates are gradually sent to all the containers one after the other. That's the only difference. Okay, rolling updates are gradually sent to different containers in Kubernetes and in Docker Swarm, but in Kubernetes, it's to all the containers within the same pod. Okay, rolling updates sent one after the other to the different containers in the same pod. That's the point. And when it comes to rollbacks, again, both provide the same thing. Okay, you can roll back your changes. So if your master at any point of time figures out that your rolling update is going to fail, then you have an option of rollback. You actually have the functionality in both Kubernetes and in Docker Swarm. But the point is, there's no automatic rollback. In case of your Kubernetes cluster, if your master finds out that the update is going to fail, then it will automatically roll back to the previously stable condition. But with Swarm, the Swarm manager will not automatically do it. I mean, it provides optionality to roll back, but it's not automatic. That is the only difference between these two. So I think over here also Kubernetes slightly beats Docker Swarm, okay, just nudges ahead of it. And now coming to the seventh point, which is nothing but data volumes. Now, data volumes is a very key concept because you can have a shared volume space for different containers. Okay. Now, the conceptual difference between these two is that in Kubernetes, you have multiple pods and only containers inside that one particular pod can have a shared volume. Okay. And the difference with your Docker Swarm is that since there are no pods, pretty much any container can share the shared space with other containers. So that is the only difference. Okay. So I don't think I would go ahead and rate these two. It's just a functionality and a conceptual difference between these two tools. Okay. Now moving on to the last point, logging and monitoring. So with Kubernetes, you have inbuilt tools which does the logging for you and also the monitoring happens. Okay. So there's a particular directory where you can go and you can read your logs and you can find out where your errors are, why your deployment failed, why something happened. You can get all those details because it automatically does the logging. And the monitoring part is used by your master to basically analyze what's your cluster status at all the times, what is the status of all your nodes, what is the status of the different pods in the nodes, are all the containers up and running, are containers responsive. So Kubernetes uses monitoring for all these purposes. Okay, but with Docker Swarm there's no inbuilt tool and you have to use third-party tools, something like an ELK, right? So I've done that before and I've set up ELK to work with my Docker Swarm and it pretty much does the same thing. Okay, so with ELK, you can collect all the logs, you can figure out where the error is, and even monitoring can be done. But it's just that ELK is again not a very easy tool to set up, and it's that extra step which you have to do with respect to Docker Swarm. Okay, so I think that's pretty much the end of the functionalities and the conceptual differences between these two tools, Kubernetes and Docker Swarm. Now that is the end of the theory part over here. I want to open up a Docker Swarm and Kubernetes and show you a demonstration and give you a feel as to how they work. Okay, so for that, let me open up my VMs where these two are installed. Let me start the demo with Docker Swarm first. So can everybody see my VM over here? So I have two virtual machines. I have a master and I have a slave. But when it comes to Docker Swarm, they are not called master and slave, but they are rather called manager and worker. So my manager is the manager of the cluster, and my worker will be the one that will be executing the services. All right. So like I said, with your Docker Swarm, it's very easy to bring up the cluster. And the command to do that is very simple. You can just specify Docker Swarm init advertise adder and just specify the IP address of your master. Okay. So in my case, my master or my manager's IP address is this one. Okay. So if I just hit enter, then everything's up and ready. I get the joining token, and if I just execute this command at my node end, then my cluster would be ready and I would be joining my cluster. Okay, so I'm going to copy this. Let me go to my worker and here let me paste this. If I hit enter, then it says that this node has joined the swarm as a worker. Brilliant, right? So that's as quick as it is. And with your master, you got this message saying to add a manager to the swarm, you should use this other command. Okay, but that's only if you want another node to join as a master or as a manager, but otherwise this command is good enough. So your cluster has been initialized in just a few seconds, right? So it's as simple as that. If you want to deploy an application, you can go ahead and straight away do that. Let me show you a simple application. Let me run a hello world and show you. I can use the command docker service create and let me give the name as hello world. Okay, and the image to be used is the hello world image. Okay, so I will basically get a container having the name of hello world, and that would be created, and it could be both. It could be running in both the manager and on my node. But if I want one replica of that running in both my manager and my node, then I can set, then there's another flag I can use to set that. Okay, and that is the mode flag. I can say mode is equal to global. So with this, I will have one container running on my manager end and one container in my node. And this is where the difference is with respect to Kubernetes, because in Kubernetes, only your nodes will run the services. Your manager or your master will not execute any service. Okay, it will only manage the whole deployment. Okay, so there was a spelling mistake in my command. So let me just go here and say service. Okay, so let's just wait for a few seconds until my container is up and running. Great. So as you can see, my service has been created, and this is my ID. If I want to verify my cluster state and to check if my service is ready, I can run these commands. I can do a docker node ps. Okay, and this way I'll know how many containers came up and on which nodes they were executed. So it says on my manager there were 4 of these that started. Okay, and of course it's a hello world container, so it's basically shut down immediately. And I can do a docker node ls to identify how many members are there in my cluster. So with this, you can see that there are IDs for 2 different nodes. One is my worker and the other is my manager, right? And that's how simple it is with Docker. But with Kubernetes, it's a little more different. Okay, so I think by now you got a good idea of how simple Docker Swarm is. Okay, and besides, I can also check the service status by running a few commands, right? So I have a Docker service ls. So this would basically list down the containers which are there and the services. Okay, so it says I have a hello world container which is running and it's in replicated mode, and there is one replica of this particular container, right? So I can also check more. I can do a docker service ps, and I can say the name. I can say hello world, and I have details about my container, right? So initially there was one container which started off in my worker, and then it got shut down, and then one more on my worker, and then a couple of them on my manager. So these are the details, and this is how you drill down, right? So you've specified that I need one particular service, that is the hello world service, and I need this many replicas wherein I want them running on my manager and my worker, and then the container has been deployed and it's running, and that's what you can see here, right? So that is about Docker Swarm. And let me bring the VM down and bring up my Kubernetes VMs to show you a demonstration of Kubernetes. Okay. Well, I hope the concept was clear to you, but in case if you have any doubt, then I would request you to go to Edureka's YouTube channel and watch my video on Docker Swarm, where I've shown load balancing between the different nodes, and I've also shown how to ensure high availability. Okay. So in the meanwhile, let me just shut this down. To bring down the cluster, I can basically get my nodes to leave the cluster first and then shut down the cluster itself. So if I want to bring down my cluster, I can do it with a simple command. But before I do that, let me stop the service which I created. Okay, so Docker service rm and hello world was the name. So I'm going to stop the service, and now there are not going to be any replicas of this service or this container. Okay, now let me go back to my node, and here let me leave the cluster, the swarm cluster. Okay, and the simple command for that is docker swarm leave. So if I hit the command at the node end, then this node will leave the swarm. Okay, so if I run the docker node ls command over here, then the entry for my node would be gone. It would have only one entry, that is my manager. Okay, but anyways, if I want to bring the cluster to an end, then I can get even my manager to leave the cluster, and I can execute the same command for that. I can say docker swarm leave and everything's back. So yeah, let me use force. Okay, node has left. So that's it with docker swarm. Okay, let me just close this terminal and go to my next demo. So now let me open up my VMs which have the Kubernetes running. Okay, so this is my Kubernetes master, and this is my Kubernetes node. Okay, now the thing is that I'm not showing you the entire setup over here because it's really complicated. All right, so I don't want to go ahead and execute all the 10-15 commands and show you the entire cluster setup because it's going to take a lot of time to do that. Rather, if you want to know how to do the cluster setup with Kubernetes, then you can go and see the blog which I've written. And also there's another video on how to set up the Kubernetes cluster. All right, so these two would do you of any help, the YouTube video and the blog. and the link to both of them are below in the description. Okay, so let me just straight away get started and tell you what I've already done. If I've wanted to set up the cluster, then there are a lot of things which I should have done. Okay, starting from here. So basically I've started my init command over here. I've specified which pod network I'm using. I'm going to use a Calico pod network, so I've specified that, and I've specified the address where the other nodes have to subscribe. Okay, and then there are various commands which I have to run with respect to setting up the environment. Okay, these, and then I've basically set up the Calico pod over here, and then I've made room for setting up the dashboard, and then I've brought my proxy up. Okay, yeah, and then from the second terminal I've done a few more things. I've brought up my dashboard account, so I have created a service account for my dashboard, and then I've done the cluster role binding by saying that this dashboard, that I'm the admin, and give me the admin privileges. So I've done that here, and then I've basically obtained the key, which is basically the authentication key for accessing the dashboard. So these are the so many other commands which are needed to be executed from the master's end before your node joins. And then after that, I basically went to my node, and then I executed the one command which I was asked to execute. Okay, so this was the join command generated at my master. So I took that and I pasted it here, and then my node successfully has joined the cluster. So this was the entire process, and you can go to my blog and to my videos and go through this whole process. Okay, so I've also brought up the dashboard, right? So let me just straight away go to the dashboard and show you how simple it is, how easy it is to make any deployment, because that is the whole advantage with your dashboard, right? Docker Swarm may be easier. That's what I showed you. With Kubernetes, it's much more better. And this is the Kubernetes dashboard that comes up. It comes up on this port number. All right. And if you want to start your deployment, it's very, very simple. Okay, you can just go to this create button over here, click on create, and then you have option. You can either write your JSON script, or you can upload the JSON file which I've already written, or you can click on this create an app. Over here, it's basically a click functionality. And here you can just put in your app name. So let's say I want to deploy the same Hello World app. So I'll just put the hello, I'll give the name over here, hello world, and then the base image which I want to use for this is going to be the hello world image, is going to be present in my Docker Hub registry or the Google registry. So hello world is the image, and let's say I want 3 pods initially. Okay, and let me just straight away click deploy. Okay, and with that your application is deployed. And similarly, if there's anything else you want to containerize, it's as simple. If it's going to be an Nginx server or a Tomcat or an Apache server which you want to deploy, you can just choose the base image and hit on the deploy button, and yes, it's straight away deployed. And you'll get something like this, which would show what is the overview and what is the status of your cluster. Okay, as you can see, my deployments, my pods and replica sets, everything is healthy, 100%. Right, so this is my deployments. So it says that 2 out of 3 pods are running. So let's just give it a few minutes, and then all the 3 pods will be up and running. Okay, you got to give it a few seconds because it's just 19 seconds old. And yeah, these are the 3 pods. The third one is coming up. Okay, because yeah, it says terminated because the hello world container, it's a self-destruct container, right? It prints hello world and it exits. That's what happens here. Same thing with replica sets. I've mentioned 2 out of 3 pods, which means that at all times there will be 3 pods running, and my replica sets and replication controller is the one that will control this aspect. Okay, so yeah, that is pretty much it, and that's how easy and simple it is to work with Kubernetes. Right, so you can have your own opinion. You can choose whether you want to use Kubernetes, or you can choose if you want to use Docker Swarm. Okay, so my take on this is, if you have a very simple application, then you would rather be better off with Docker Swarm. Okay, and also if you have very few clusters which you are dealing with. But if you're dealing with a real prod environment, then I would say Kubernetes is a better option. And also when the containers are many in number, when you have a lot of containers, then it's easier to work with Kubernetes. You can just specify the configurations. You can say that I need these many containers running at all the times. I need these many nodes which are connected to my cluster, and I will have these many pods running in these nodes. And whatever you say, that will be followed by your Kubernetes. So that is why Kubernetes is better in my opinion. And you can have your own version. So whatever your choice is between the two, I would like to listen to your opinion. You can please put in your opinion in the comment box. And if you have any doubts, you can let me know. All right. So before I end this video, I would like to talk about the market share between Kubernetes and Docker Swarm. When it comes to new articles or blogs written on these 2 tools, then Kubernetes beats Docker Swarm 9:1. For every 9 blogs written on Kubernetes, there's 1 written on Docker Swarm. So that is the difference here. 90% is to 10%. Same thing with web searches. right? So Kubernetes has way more searches, 90% more searches as compared to Docker Swarm's 10% search. And same thing you can say for publications, GitHub stars, and for your GitHub commits. Okay, so Kubernetes pretty much wins on every term here, and it's way more popular, and it's way more used, and it's probably more comfortable. And if you have any problem at any point of time, you have a huge community which will help you out with all the replies, right, of whatever your error is. So if you want simplicity, I would say go for Docker Swarm. But if you want cluster strength and if you want to ensure high availability in your prod especially, then Kubernetes is your tool to go for. But however, both are equally good and they are pretty much neck to neck on all grounds. And this was a statistic which I picked up from Platform 9, which is a very famous tech company, right? So they write about tech. So I think on that note, I would like to conclude today's session. And I'd like to thank you for watching the video till the very end. Do let us know on what topics you want us to make more videos, and it would be a pleasure for us to do the same. And with that, I'd like to take my leave. Thank you and happy learning.
I hope you have enjoyed listening to this video. Please be kind enough to like it, and you can comment any of your doubts and queries, and we will reply them at the earliest. Do look out for more videos in our playlist and subscribe to Edureka channel to learn more. Happy learning!